A quiet field in southern Wisconsin holds a shape that cannot be seen from the ground. An animal form, carved into earth, stretches beneath grass that has long since forgotten its purpose. Nearby, dairy farms run in straight lines, efficient, modern, productive. Nothing about the landscape suggests what came before. And yet, this same ground once moved goods across a continent, emptied forests by the mile, and forced entire nations to vanish and return again. Cold air settles over lakes that cut deep into the land, their surfaces still in the early morning light. Forests gather thick along the northern horizon, broken only by rivers that move with quiet precision toward larger systems. Soil lies dark and fertile across the south, shaped by glaciers that withdrew slowly, leaving behind a terrain designed for both growth and extraction. Beneath this calm surface, paths already exist, routes of movement, exchange, and control, long before any map records them. This is Wisconsin, before it becomes what it is known for. What appears to be a stable agricultural and industrial region is, in reality, a landscape repeatedly reorganized by outside demand, each system replacing the last while carrying its consequences forward. This account follows Wisconsin from its earliest human presence after the Ice Age to its modern identity, tracing how cycles of trade, extraction, settlement, and reform reshaped both land and society. The first movement begins in a landscape that is still changing. Around 12,000 years ago, as ice sheets withdraw, the ground is exposed in stages: wet, unstable, then gradually habitable. Small groups enter, following animals that will not remain. Mammoths and mastodons move through open terrain, then disappear, leaving behind a system that must adapt quickly. Over time, adaptation becomes structure. Communities form along rivers and lakes, where movement is efficient and resources can be predicted. Seasonal cycles dictate rhythm: movement in winter, gathering in summer, exchange in between. Knowledge accumulates not in written form, but in practiced patterns repeated across generations. Then the land itself begins to carry meaning. Effigy mounds rise across southern Wisconsin, shaped into animals and symbolic forms, constructed with deliberate placement. They are not decorative. They mark territory, belief, and continuity. Hundreds once existed across the region, embedding human presence directly into the terrain. These forms suggest something important. The land is not being used temporarily. It is being organized permanently. Further south and west, influences extend from larger Mississippian systems. At sites like Aztalan, controlled settlements appear: structured layouts, elevated platforms, enclosed spaces. Trade expands beyond immediate regions, linking Wisconsin into wider networks of exchange. By the 1600s, the region is fully inhabited by distinct nations, including the Ojibwe, Menominee, Ho-Chunk, Potawatomi, and others. Each group maintains defined territories, diplomatic relationships, and systems of resource management. Movement exists, but it is regulated. Exchange occurs, but it is balanced. The system is stable. And then a new force enters, one that does not follow the same limits. In 1634, a single expedition reaches the region and begins a transformation that will not reverse. Jean Nicolet arrives near present-day Green Bay, searching for a passage to Asia. Instead, he encounters a network already functioning at scale. What he brings is not discovery, but connection, to a demand that originates far beyond the continent. Fur becomes the link. European markets require it in large quantities. Wisconsin's waterways, already efficient, become channels feeding a transatlantic system. The North American fur trade expands rapidly, integrating indigenous networks into a larger structure. At first, the system appears cooperative. French traders rely on indigenous knowledge, routes, and alliances. Goods move in both directions. Metal tools, textiles, and firearms enter the region, altering daily life in measurable ways. But the balance begins to shift. Demand increases, and with it, dependency. Control follows slowly, embedded in trade rather than imposed through force. Over time, local systems adjust to meet external expectations. Then, control changes hands. After the 7 Years' War, France loses its claim, and Britain assumes authority. The fur trade continues, largely unchanged in function but redirected in loyalty. Settlement remains minimal. Extraction remains central. Another transition follows. After the American Revolution, the land is ceded to the United States. The system changes again, not in what it extracts, but in how it defines the land itself. Through the Northwest Ordinance, the region becomes structured as future state territory. Boundaries replace fluid space. Ownership replaces shared use. The land is no longer part of a network. It is now a resource to be divided. Movement accelerates, and pressure begins to build. By the early 19th century, expansion moves quickly. Lead deposits in southwestern Wisconsin trigger a rapid influx of settlers. Mining camps appear almost immediately, bringing population growth that reshapes governance. In 1836, Wisconsin becomes its own territory. Infrastructure follows expansion. Railroads extend across the region, linking interior settlements to Great Lakes ports. Movement becomes faster, more predictable, and more controlled. Trade scales upward. Cities begin to consolidate power. Milwaukee emerges as a central node, its location on Lake Michigan turning it into a major industrial and shipping hub. Grain, timber, and manufactured goods move through its docks in increasing volume. Immigration intensifies the system. Large numbers of Germans and Scandinavians arrive, followed by other European groups. They bring agricultural methods, cultural institutions, and labor capacity that reshape rural and urban life alike. Farms expand across southern Wisconsin. Wheat production rises quickly, feeding both local and national demand. By 1848, Wisconsin is admitted as the 30th state. On the surface, the system appears complete. Agriculture is productive. Industry is expanding. Cities are growing. But the underlying structure is already beginning to strain. Wheat farming depletes soil nutrients at a rate that cannot be sustained. Yields begin to decline. Farmers face a choice: adapt or fail. In the north, forests are cut at industrial scale. Logging operations strip large areas of timber, sending logs downriver toward mills that process them into marketable goods. Rivers are no longer just natural systems. They are mechanisms. The system has reached its peak, and its limits are becoming visible. The cost of expansion becomes increasingly clear. Indigenous nations are subjected to repeated treaties that reduce their land holdings. Agreements made in the 1820s through the 1840s transfer vast territories to the United States, opening space for settlement, mining, and logging. Resistance emerges but is met with force. The Black Hawk War marks a decisive turning point, effectively ending organized resistance in much of southern Wisconsin. Removal policies follow. Some nations are forced westward, displaced from lands they have occupied for generations. Others, including the Ho-Chunk, return repeatedly, re-establishing presence despite continued pressure. At the same time, new indigenous communities arrive, relocated from the east. The Oneida and Stockbridge Munsee establish themselves within Wisconsin, creating a layered geography of displacement and persistence. The system becomes more complex. It does not erase what came before, it overlays it. Meanwhile, economic pressures intensify. Wheat farming declines due to soil exhaustion and competition from other regions. Farmers shift toward dairy production, a system better suited to the land's changing conditions. This transition stabilizes agriculture, but only after failure forces adaptation. In cities, industrial growth continues, supported by immigrant labor. Factories expand, production increases, but inequality grows alongside it. The system continues to function, but it is no longer stable. The transformation unfolds gradually, but its impact is decisive. Forests in the north are depleted after decades of intensive logging. Timber production declines, forcing the industry to contract and relocate. Agriculture reorganizes around dairy, creating a new identity that reshapes land use and economic focus. Wisconsin becomes associated with milk, cheese, and livestock rather than grain. Industrialization deepens. Manufacturing expands in urban centers, producing machinery, paper, and processed goods that integrate the state into national and global markets. During the Civil War, Wisconsin contributes significant manpower and resources to the Union. Units such as the Iron Brigade gain recognition for their effectiveness in major battles, reflecting the state's growing integration into national systems. After the war, reform movements begin to take shape. Under figures like Robert M. La Follette Sr., Wisconsin develops a reputation for progressive governance. Policies are introduced to regulate industry, improve labor conditions, and expand democratic participation. The system begins to regulate itself. But regulation does not replace earlier systems. It builds on them. By the 20th century, Wisconsin stabilizes into a recognizable structure. Dairy agriculture dominates rural regions, supported by technological advances and cooperative systems. Manufacturing anchors urban centers, producing goods that extend far beyond state borders. After World War II, suburban expansion reshapes population distribution, particularly in the corridor between Milwaukee and Madison. Rural areas mechanize, reducing labor needs while increasing output. The economy diversifies. Education, healthcare, tourism, and services expand alongside traditional industries. Northern forests, once heavily logged, become centers for recreation rather than extraction. But earlier systems remain present. Indigenous nations continue to assert sovereignty through treaty rights, governance, and economic development. Their presence reflects continuity rather than revival. Political dynamics remain complex, shaped by competing traditions of reform, labor activism, and conservatism. Wisconsin does not settle into a single identity. It contains multiple systems at once, each one built on the last. None of them fully replaced. The land was reshaped again and again. The system behind it never changed.